Welcome to Haunted Talks, the official podcast of The Haunted Walk, offering thematic walking tours in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario. My name is Jim Dean. I am the creative director of the company, and I really appreciate you joining us for today's show. In Canada, there is no jail currently operational or from the past that is as infamous as the Kingston Penitentiary. The maximum security facility opened in 1835 as the Provincial Penitentiary of the province of Upper Canada. It didn't become known as the Kingston Penitentiary until after Confederation, some 30 years or so later. The pen is older than Canada itself. As you might imagine, the history of the place is dark and fascinating. The original rules for inmates stated that inmates must not exchange a word with one another under any pretense whatever, and must not exchange looks, winks, laughs, nods, or gesticulate to each other. Violators would receive the lash. The first substantial reform at the pen took place in 1849 after a commission's report found evidence of graft, corruption, cruelty, and sinister politics. Particularly shocking to us today was the treatment of children who did time and received punishment along the regular adult population. One 10-year-old was lashed 57 times for staring, winking, and laughing. Another 8-year-old received 47 corporal punishments over a 9-month period. As the report mentions, it is horrifying to think of these little children being lacerated with the lash before 500 grown men. Kingston Penitentiary experienced several riots over its 180 years. The worst of these, in 1971, lasted 4 days and resulted in the death of 2 inmates and the destruction of much of the prison. 6 guards were held hostage, but all were eventually released unharmed. The prisoners issued formal grievances to the media, including lack of recreation time, lack of work, and concerns about their future in the newly built Millhaven prison. The south wing of the penitentiary was so badly damaged that it never reopened as a cell block. A number of infamous Canadian criminals were imprisoned at KP, including James Donnelly, the patriarch of the infamous Black Donnellys, who we covered in episode 11. Russell Williams, Paul Bernardo, Clifford Olson, and many more with equally as bizarre, rich, unexpected, or terrifying stories. Much of Margaret Atwood's book, Alias Grace, is set in the Kingston Penitentiary, where the real-life Grace Marks was imprisoned. When it was closed in 2013, the penitentiary was one of the oldest prisons in continuous use. Over the past few years, as a stopgap measure due to the high demand, Correctional Service Canada, who is still responsible for the grounds, in partnership with Parks of the St. Lawrence, has been offering charity tours of the site, which have been extremely popular. We at the Haunted Walk were very fortunate to get to go on one of these very first tours of the pen. And being behind those walls is an experience that is not easily put into words. The question the City of Kingston and other stakeholders now face is what to do with the penitentiary and the penitentiary grounds, which cover about 20 acres of prime real estate along the banks of Lake Ontario, surrounded by residential and commercial properties. The land is worth a fortune, with many opportunities for retail and residential development. But how do we quantify the historical value of the site for current and future generations to come? And how much of it can be changed, altered, or destroyed before that history becomes significantly lost or is forever gone? Public consultations have been going on for the last year, and the City of Kingston has recently released 4 very different exploration illustrations or sketches that reveal the potential future plans for the site. And if you'd like to check out these plans for yourself, we'll put the link up on our website, hauntedwalk.com/podcasts. Put it in the show notes there so you can click through and see these 4 different versions they've made available. Now, these sketches or illustrations range from keeping the pen virtually intact as is, as a historical site for public interpretation, a Alcatraz of the North, if you will, a tourist destination, to the very opposite end of the spectrum, illustration number 4, which shows the pen's iconic walls being pulled down, many of its buildings being repurposed or changed, and including new condo residential developments right on the grounds of the former jail itself. At the core of the issue is the question, should the Kingston Penitentiary be intact as a historical site? Or is it okay to use the penitentiary as a backdrop or a setting for other day-to-day activities? In today's show, we will be speaking to 5 uniquely qualified experts around this fundamental question. A tour operator from Kingston, a genealogist and historian who specializes in the Upper Canada period when the penitentiary was built, and an extremely accomplished Canadian photographer who got the rare opportunity to shoot film behind the bars while the penitentiary was still in operation. From there, we will journey down south, as it does seem the best comparison to what could happen to Kingston Pen is Alcatraz, one of the most famous islands and certainly jails in the world. We will be speaking with a representative from the San Francisco Travel Association, and then we will board the ferry and join one of the most experienced park rangers to give us our own little personal and private tour of Alcatraz.
We hope that you enjoy your cruise, and thank you for sailing with Alcatraz Cruises. Alcatraz, the most infamous island in the world. We invite you to explore its multi-layered history. You'll walk in the footsteps of America's most dangerous criminals and the men who guarded them.
Before we get to that, it does seem, knock on wood, that things are starting to warm up a bit, a little nicer to be outside. Spring is in the air, and I did want to let you know that during March break in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, we will be running tours virtually every night. So if you're traveling for March break to any of our 3 cities, or if you live there and maybe need to get the kids out of the house if they're driving you nuts, we'll be happy to take them for a walk and, of course, maybe give them a bit of a scare as well. Tours run on the weekends in all 3 cities as well throughout the month. For tour information, please visit our website, which is hauntedwalk.com. We have a number of big projects, ideas in the works, so please be sure to follow us on social, Facebook and Instagram in particular. A lot of exciting stuff is going to be coming soon. Just search for The Haunted Walk. I was lucky that the first person I wanted to talk to about the future of the Kingston Penitentiary only works about 20 feet from my desk, and that's the owner of the Haunted Walk, Glen Shackleton. Glen, through the Haunted Walk, has been giving tours of Kingston, where the company started, since 1995. And I can't tell you how many times we have been asked about the Kingston Pen, and we have included on various products. We've offered some bus tours and things like that. But we regularly get asked and encouraged, we would love to see you doing tours of the pen. Now, I have my own strong feelings about that, but I think we should go right to the boss. And I asked Glen, how enthusiastic would you be for the Haunted Walk to have a part in the future of the Kingston Pen?
I think it would be the opportunity of a lifetime for us to be able to give tours in the penitentiary. We've been doing jail tours for so many years in Ottawa, probably the longest running and most popular jail tours, I imagine, in Canada, at the old Ottawa jail. the Kingston Penitentiary just is on such a different level in terms of its importance to our national story as well as to Kingston's story itself. And having been in the prison, in the penitentiary myself as well, I mean, the site is just amazing. It has so much sense of history to it. There are so many stories, so many interesting stories that the place has to tell, both in terms of what has happened there in the past, as well as its more recent history, stories of the inmates who spent their lives there, stories of the guards who spent their lives there. And I think it's just, you could not overestimate what an important site this is. So if we were to be given any opportunity to work in partnership in terms of delivering any sort of tours at the site, yes, we would leap to that opportunity, absolutely. A big attraction, anchor attraction like this is the kind of thing that will bring people that will then do other things in Kingston. They'll shop, they'll visit hotels, they will visit restaurants, they will spend their money locally. Tourism is one of the most important parts of Kingston's industry as it is, but I think something like this would just take it on so much bigger of a scale. It's a little bit like the role that the Parliament Hill has in Ottawa, where you really can't overestimate just how important that is to the city. It's the one thing on everyone's itinerary that they must do. I think that the Kingston Penitentiary could easily play a big, and the interest that's been shown in it so far has proven that. They sell out of their tickets almost as soon as they put them up. It's incredible the amount of interest people have in it. And I think the thing is, right now, we've only seen the tip of the iceberg. The interest that we've seen so far has mostly been from locals or regional interests, but once you have a proper tourism attraction in there that's got a long-term plan involved in terms of attracting visitors, you're going to see those numbers just skyrocket. Our interest in this is greater than just the direct opportunity of potentially doing something at the penitentiary. To me, it's just so important to make sure that that site is preserved and is presented to the public. I think it could easily be the jewel in the crown of Kingston's tourism industry. We ourselves have seen, since the penitentiary tours have been offered, we've seen dramatic increases on visitation on our own haunted walks as well too, because people are coming to Kingston and seeing this as a major attraction, as a real reason to come.
How would you address the concerns of those who think the penitentiary's history is too dark or somehow inappropriate for mass consumption?
I think, it's valid to have concerns about exactly how a place is commemorated, especially a place that has a dark history. I do think that there are, you do need to be careful to make sure that whatever you're doing is respectful to the commemorating the history of the place. But I think there's so much that can be done that is interesting to delve into the history of a place that can be done right. I mean, I've seen it done at places like the Wicklow Jail in Wicklow in Ireland, at Alcatraz. Alcatraz is one of the biggest tourist attractions in the United States. And, is it a tourist attraction? Absolutely. It draws a huge amount of visitation. But is it respectful? Does it teach people about the darker part of our history? To me, I think that that's vitally important to all of us, is to be able to not just, look at a whitewashed version of our history, but to see it warts and all, and see all of the elements, including the darker parts of our history. Otherwise, we tend to make those same mistakes again and again. But I think it would be a huge mistake to do anything that's going to erode the crown jewel of that site itself, which is the penitentiary.
Janice Nickerson is a professional genealogist specializing in the Upper Canada period.
Upper Canada was a very small society. Most of the government jobs were not the kinds of things you think of that you take on as a profession. Even lawyers in those days, that wasn't the only thing they did, because there wasn't the demand for that as a full-time occupation. Jailers weren't full-time. There were no full-time policemen. So a lot of our ancestors got involved in the justice system in all sorts of ways other than being criminals. They also had to serve on juries. There was no choice in that either, just as there isn't now. But the vast majority of our ancestors ended up doing that because there were so few of them. So everybody had played a role. And then they'll also turn up in the court records as witnesses and whatnot. So you can find out not just about who was charged with what crime, but the whole story behind it and who was interviewed and what they had to say. And sometimes that involved a lot more women and children than might appear in other kinds of records.
What was crime and punishment like before and after the Kingston Penitentiary opened?
Kingston Pen was opened in 1835, and Upper Canada, as a formal period, ended in 1841. It plays a large symbolic role in that it was the culmination of many years of small backward society trying to figure out how to manage the population. And through that time, they went from the Western world in general had this idea that people's character was sort of born into them. So you were born bad or good. And so punishment was really just revenge. You weren't trying to fix anything when you convicted somebody and sentenced them to flogging or branding or any of the horrific punishments that were very common in the early 1800s. And then they had this idea of building a penitentiary, which would be a really different kind of institution where they could try to fix you. And it was going to be run in a very formal, organized way. So they thought that if they put everybody in separate cells, for example, instead of in one big room as they were in the jails, that they could separate them from the influence of the other prisoners. They weren't allowed to talk to each other. They weren't even allowed to look at each other.
What stories have you come across in your research that are connected to the pen?
A recent one I came up against, I don't know the larger story, but I was looking through newspapers for a client, just pulling all references to his family that lived in York County, just north of Toronto. And his farming ancestor, he had 7 sheep stolen from him in the middle of the night in the 1890s. They identified 2 men as having stolen these 7 sheep. Months later, you see them in the court. They were sentenced to Kingston Penitentiary for 7 years each. 7 years for stealing 7 sheep. And I just about choked when I saw the harshness of that sentence. They were heavier when dealing with property, partly because 7 sheep represented a large portion of the livelihood of the farmer. But we think of something like Kingston Penitentiary as being for the worst of the worst, the hardened criminals, the murderers, the rapists, the uncontrollable brutes, and these were not that.
As a historian and genealogist, what do you think we need to do to preserve history?
We do a poor job of preserving our built history in general. We have so little of the Upper Canada period physically left. In the city of Toronto, we have virtually nothing of the original town of York still standing. It's all been destroyed. I tried to create a tour of Old York, and basically you go from corner to corner pointing out what used to be on this corner. We make the mistake of thinking that it's not old enough to really matter. That in Europe, there are buildings from the 1500s, and we have nothing that old. So this is only 200 years old. It's not really history, but it will be. And if we don't preserve it, you can't go back and fix it. Preserving the things that you can touch is just as valuable as preserving the stories.
Geoffrey James is a well-known Canadian landscape photographer. He was recently named Toronto's first photo laureate. Shortly before the penitentiary closed, he had the unique opportunity to go behind bars at Kingston Pen and photograph the architectural features, the cells, and the inmates as well. If you want to see some of his photos from the Kingston Pen, I'll put a link up on our webpage, hauntedwalk.com/podcasts. Geoffrey, what was it like working in the Kingston Penitentiary for 6 months?
I pitched it as a kind of historical document, And indeed, it had to go all the way up to the Privy Council to get permission, so it was a big deal. But once I was allowed in, I had basically carte blanche. So it was an incredible project to do. Not easy, but something I'm glad I did. Because if I hadn't done it, we wouldn't have the documentation. It's a very strange place, very singular. The thing is, and I don't think we have this anymore, but it's first of all, it's a symbolic architecture. It's built to intimidate you. Just the process of going in, there's huge doors, they're massive wood doors with steel bits on them, and you go in, and nowadays you have to go through airport scanning and checking your cell phone and everything. And then there's a second door, which is closed, which leads to the inner courtyard. And the moment you're inside, you are inside. You have no idea what's happening beyond those walls. The walls are built high, partly to stop people escaping, but you can't see in, and you can't really see out. I would go in the morning, and I'd go out for lunch. I'd go out and have a nice lunch, because there's really nowhere to eat in there. Although I did have the chili once, the prison chili, and it wasn't bad. Much better than I had in my English boarding school. Once you're in that world, it's such a different world. And I found it very heavy. I would drive down from Toronto to do this, and I couldn't really take. After about 3 days, I felt it was probably a good idea to go back and clear my head and sort of see what I'd done and think about it. I don't think I could have done it for weeks and weeks on end. So it was always in very short, intense bursts, and sometimes I would photograph at night as well, because it's a different place at night. It's its own world, and it's very, very heavy. I found it very, very heavy.
What would you like seen done with the Kingston Penitentiary?
First thing, I was surprised that the institution was closed without any clear idea of what would happen to it. It seems to be a very strange way to proceed, right? It's definitely a huge part of Canada's history, predating Confederation, and what I didn't mention earlier on, where you were asking me about, the physical aspect of the place. After you walk in through that front door, it's very, very impressive. It's kind of Georgian architecture, very handsome gray stone architectural ensemble that it's very powerful. Obviously, the idea of tearing it down, I think, would just be complete madness, and the erasure of our history. But what actually you could do with it, I would like to think the whole world isn't going to end up as condos.
So far, we've spoken to a tour operator, a historian, and an artist, all with unique and kind of personal connections to the history of Kingston Pen. I really wanted to speak to the experts on Alcatraz, as it serves as perhaps the best case study for converting a major, well-known correctional institution into a well-visited historic site. I reached out to Laurie Armstrong, Director of Media Relations for US and Canada for the San Francisco Travel Association.
Alcatraz is a tremendous icon for San Francisco. It's probably in our top 3 to 5 icons, things that people recognize around the world. You ask them about San Francisco, they know the Golden Gate Bridge, they know Alcatraz, they know Fisherman's Wharf, and maybe they know the cable cars. So, and this has really been perpetuated through, movies like The Rock and Escape from Alcatraz and The Birdman of Alcatraz. It is definitely an icon for people all over the world. And it's one of those things, for a lot of people, it becomes a bucket list experience, that they really, really want to come and experience Alcatraz.
Laurie, what was it like the first time you got to visit The Rock?
your first impression of Alcatraz is purely as a prison and as this bizarre place where this strange thing happened with these bad people, And it's really, it's intriguing to people, this idea of a prison. It's on an island, so it's very remote. Kids are especially fascinated by this whole idea of these terrible criminals being, incarcerated in these cells. The cells look really small, and the whole environment looks austere, as it should. It's a prison. And so that really seems to be the first impression that people get is they're just taken by the drama of this prison environment.
In trying to wrap my head around the size of Alcatraz and its importance to San Francisco, I wonder if you think it would be fair to say that given that 1.5 million people visit the island each year, and that it serves as kind of a major lure for people to come visit San Francisco, would you say the economic impact from Alcatraz as a tourist attraction is in the hundreds, if not billions of dollars?
I think that's fair to say. The economic impact of Alcatraz actually even starts outside of San Francisco or California or the United States, because international tour operators, people that are putting on packages that you're going to buy in Canada or Germany or Brazil or whatever, they are including Alcatraz tickets in their packages, that people are buying their package deals, and Alcatraz is part of that. So it starts there, and then here in San Francisco, it's included in a lot of different packages, whether it might be a hotel package or a tour package or something. So very much part of the economic equation of San Francisco. So yeah, the impact is really huge in terms of employment and fees and taxes generated, in terms of generating tour business. The fact that restaurants along the waterfront, you have a view of Alcatraz, that's a selling point for them as well. So yeah, I think that, let's put it this way. If Alcatraz were to disappear, San Francisco, of course, would continue, but we wouldn't have this unique and historic island prison that is at the same time the most beautiful and the most awful story you could ever imagine. So we would be at a great loss without Alcatraz. Every now and then somebody will propose, well, I think they ought to put a theme park out there, or we should make it into housing or something. I think that would be met with such tremendous resistance that I don't think it's possible. Frankly, of course it's a national park, so it is preserved, but I don't think that the tourism community would be in favor of that. I think that people, there are still enough people in the world, and there's more every day, who have not been to Alcatraz, that it continues to be a very viable and valuable part of our industry.
John Cantwell has been a national park ranger on Alcatraz Island for 26 years, longer than any inmate served at the facility. John, how did Alcatraz become a national park?
We've got military history, 80 years of the United States Army occupying Alcatraz, 29 years as a maximum security federal penitentiary, and then, of course, the American Indian occupation that happened in 1969, and that lasted for 19 months on Alcatraz. The National Park Service has been on the Rock for over 40 years. We took the island over from General Services Administration in 1972, and the first tour on Alcatraz was October 26, 1973, for the general public, and it's been a huge success. We have grown from 1,000 people a day to upwards to 5,000 a day visiting Alcatraz. 1.5 million people venture out to the island every year, and a few years ago, TripAdvisor actually gave us the #1 attraction in the United States. In 1934, the Federal Bureau of Prisons take over, and they ran it as an escape-proof prison. And that's what most people know Alcatraz for, is the home of the worst of the worst. And there were only about 1,500 convicts that did time during those 29 years on Alcatraz. The average population was around 250 prisoners at one time. They went up to 300 at the highest point of prison population during the Federal Bureau of Prisons. We had 100 guards on Alcatraz, so that's a very high guard ratio, 1 to 3 basically. They counted everybody 12 times a day. The Federal Bureau of Prisons say that no one escaped from Alcatraz. The people that got into the San Francisco Bay were overcome by the cold temperature, and the currents dragged their bodies out to the Pacific Ocean. But I would probably say that's the #1 question out here, is how many people escaped. And there were 34 people that tried to escape, 14 individual escape attempts, and 5 were never accounted for. The bodies never surfaced, and it's still a mystery. So it served its purpose well, and the main reason it closed is in 1963 because of operating costs. The 22-acre rock was up for sale, and there were lots of different ideas: bird sanctuary, playground for kids, have a Statue of Liberty on the West Coast, Space Needle. Lamar Hunt, a businessman from Texas, proposed an idea to have a hotel on the island and a casino. And Alcatraz, as a historic site for the National Park Service, we strive to be able to preserve history for future generations, and so that they can learn about the layers of history. There's something about stepping onto the island and looking at a wall that maybe has a little peeling paint on it, and you can let your imagination run wild and think that maybe Al Capone leaned against that wall. To immerse yourself in the island and to hear the bells from the churches in town and people's voices even traveling across the water. Just that visual, I think, is worth the visit and imagine being a convict on Alcatraz. That view was the punishment of the rock. The old saying, so close and yet so far away, they could hear people having a good time, enjoying their lives in the big city right across the water, just a mile away, a mile and a quarter, and they couldn't have it. And for the general public to come out and to actually hear a cell door close and get that visual of those doors, the slammer. We do a variety of programs for the general public and to learn about the layers of history firsthand. That's what a national park site is all about. We've got over 400 national park sites in the United States, and as I said earlier, Alcatraz has been voted as one of the number one attractions in the United States. So there's just something about being on the rock rather than opening up a book. You can relive history just by walking the island.
Can you give us a sense of the demand to visit the island?
We're sold out a month to 2 months in advance, and we continue in the summer months to sell out a month in advance. And there's a saying, for every 5,000 people that come out to the island, there's another 5,000 that couldn't get a ticket. And we're looking at having more displays on the pier just for those 5,000 that didn't get that ticket to at least learn the layers of history of Alcatraz. I think it's important for people to be able to see this type of history, and maybe it's not a happy story, at least the prison story, but as a national park site, and as a ranger, I feel it's an honor to be able to work on the island and to relay that history to the public. And rather than bury it, there's plenty of hotels and casinos in the world, but there's only one Alcatraz, and it sounds like the prison up in Canada has got similar, amazing history there. And so, I'm in for preserving that history and to relay the story to the public. People can't get enough of this place, and I want to invite all the Canadians to come down and visit our little island in the middle of the San Francisco Bay.
A heartfelt thanks to all of the guests on today's show. I thought all of them had some unique and insightful comments to make. I did want to mention our genealogist website, Janice Nickerson, and that's uppercanadagenealogy.com. She can help you trace your Ontario roots, so if you're interested in doing any genealogy work, highly encourage you to check out her website and get in touch with her. If you're interested in seeing more of photographer Geoffrey James's work, he does have an exhibition called Canadian Photographs, and that's taking place from February 25th to March 25th at the Stephen Bolger Gallery in Toronto. As for my thoughts after conducting these interviews, as someone who works for the Haunted Walk, I can say we love history. And when history is going to be destroyed or lost to us, well, that's something I don't think we ever want to see. and Janice Nickerson's comment about how few buildings there are in Toronto from the Upper Canada period. I just really hope the Kingston Penitentiary does not meet that same short-sighted fate. Having had the opportunity to go behind the walls of the Kingston Penitentiary on tour, I can safely say that I think everyone listening to this podcast would get something from that experience. As someone who suffers from maybe a little claustrophobia, doesn't like to be fenced in, the isolation you felt inside those walls is like nothing I could explain to you now with my voice. A feeling in your stomach, something that you can only experience, I believe, by being there in person. The potential economic impact of creating this as a tourist attraction for Kingston and Kingstonians is like nothing that city has seen in a very long time. And you do wonder if Alcatraz, if it becomes this lure which draws people to Kingston specifically, as we've already seen happen the past few years, well, I think a lot of people could really benefit across a variety of industries. And finally, I will say that since I started working for the company in 2003, I know it has certainly been a goal or a dream of mine, and for the company as well, to have a shot at giving tours of the Kingston Pen. For the past 20 years, we've carried the lantern for Kingston's darker history and ghost stories, but there's always been one story we've never been able to properly tell. And I would love to have the opportunity to take people on some type of experience at the Kingston Pen. What's going to happen next? We'll have to wait and see. I will say, if you found any of the material on this podcast, or if you have your own strong thoughts about what should be done with the penitentiary site, please follow that link on our website, hauntedwalk.com/podcasts. Click through to the Kingston Consultation information, and there simply is an email where you can drop a few notes. And I would say some very short notes could go a long way if you feel very passionately about a particular topic. Thanks so much for listening to the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show on whichever podcast platform you're listening to us on so you know when the new episodes are coming out. And we always love getting 5-star reviews. I think we got a couple last week from our Dyatlov Pass episode. So if you're enjoying them, do us a little favor, a little comment there. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram. Information about the tours can always be found at hauntedwalk.com. Until we meet again, sweet dreams.